Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, Paperwork from Production Management to Lighting Design, presented by Jennifer Bass. My name is Laura Lawrence and I'm the Global Marketing Director at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a chat function where you can submit questions to the presenter and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded and the link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control, and we'd like to encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional University to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Jennifer Bass, the presenter for today's webinar. Jenny is a touring lighting director, designer, programmer, and technician. Throughout her career, Jenny has worked with a variety of touring acts, including Leah Michelle, The Avalanches, Mary Mack, Ray Sremmurd, Tinashe, and Earth, Wind, and Fire. And now I'll pass it over to you, Jenny.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Laura. And thanks so much, Martin and Harman, for having me. This is Paperwork from Production Management to Lighting Design, tips and tricks to kind of get your paperwork to the next level and get your paperwork working for you. So let's start out with templates. So templates are very important to paperwork, at least for my workflow. It takes a lot of the work out if you start off from the bat like having something laid out with all the information that you need to fill in. Me personally, I try to make a template for every different kind of show. So if I'm working in a venue and I have large dance show compared to a small, community event, I'm gonna have different paperwork. It's gonna have different setups with the budget and kind of how that works together, because some shows I might use all gear in-house, and then other shows might be all hired. So kind of having a template for both of those setups is very useful. I also like to work. I know some people work from. They'll have one show, and then from that they'll clear out the data and then go to the next one, which I've tried, but I've definitely found errors with that, because you want to be able to use your paperwork optimally when you're on job site compared to beforehand. And beforehand, obviously, you're going to spend the time to make sure that all the cells are working and all of that. All your calculations, all that kind of thing, just using using Excel as an example. But if you put all your data in and then you get on job site and it's quicker just to fill some things in and break, all your calculations, then, that's what you're going to do. That's much more important, to get the show rolling. But you don't want to remember all those changes. You want to always start from a template that you've checked before, that you know is accurate, that has everything working. Some reasons for a template, obviously time saving is the biggest one. I know that I've had people argue in the past that it's like, oh, but I've got to get everything going, but the time that's paid forward, especially if you do a lot of, similar style shows or even the same show every year, every other year, to have all that information just already there is so useful. Use your checklist. So especially with, if you do the same show every year, you can literally go through and be like, you've made a template, be like, this is what I bought last year, this is how much it cost, this is how much the budget was, looking at old budgets, and then having everything set up so that with changes, you can just insert everything. And it's so much quicker than starting from scratch. I put it in order of workflow so that as I would go through the process of budgeting, with hiring things or with, scheduling crew and that kind of thing, or making a schedule, I put that in order of my workflow. So then once I get the ball rolling, I can get to the end of the paperwork and be like, oh, I've done everything that I need to for that show right now, because it's set up in the way that I work. And what's great about templates and paperwork is that changing it over time to make it better and better is just, for me, the best way to work. Because every time I'm like, oh, I feel like this is slowing me down, I find a way to fix it, and then the next time it's even quicker. And like I was saying, you work on it over time. So you're investing in the next time that you use the paperwork, because there's, when you find a quicker way to do things, then the next time you can use that and not have to kind of reinvent the wheel each time. If you're working from different templates as well, then for each show you've adjusted it to the workflow of that show, which is very helpful. And different shows will evolve in different ways, so it's great to have a running document that kind of tracks that and kind of tracks, like, mid-show for this last year, we had to add a video wall and that kind of thing, so that you can kind of see, without having to remember every detail of every show, you can look at your paperwork and be like, okay, this one changes a lot, this one's always the same, this one hasn't changed in like 6 years. Yeah, and you want to be able to do quick fixes without having to remember. So one of my tricks that I found some people actually don't use, even with like resumes and that kind of thing, is just put all your information in and either delete it out or just hide it. So I have a list of things that, like when I worked at a venue, I had a list of things that I would very commonly have to run out either from the venue or from outside vendors. And I would just have a list of all of that with prices. So when I needed to use it, I could just enter in how many I needed, and then it's all right there. And then I could just hide everything that I don't use. And then if I make that a template for a certain show, then I kind of have that all logged. And it takes it's so much less time to hide something than it is to keep adding it. So every time I got every time like the venue bought a new piece of equipment, I could just put it in that list and then know that I have it, and then know that it's, it's accessible, what the cost is, and not have to like, always reach out and be like, so what are we renting this for, and all that kind of thing. I try to use QuickKeys as much as possible. There's so many things like Excel, for example, but I mean, most software that you're going to be using is going to have some form of QuickKeys, or, Excel even has macros that you can set up. So it's really about what is something that you use all the time that there's not a QuickKey for. You can just go in and, and add that. I find if I'm doing something, especially if I'm doing something more than a couple times per paperwork, like like I use clear cells and that kind of thing, that there isn't a button for, make a QuickKey for it or make a macro for it, so that, you don't have to be clicking around every single time. Yeah, I kind of use the self-check system where it's like, oh, I've done this like 3 times. I'm, just using this paperwork right now. It's probably a good time to make a QuickKey for it, or figure out the QuickKey if it does have one. And then macros are great too. You can set up kind of anything you want, so that when you start your paperwork, then it's all, it's already working for you. And calculations. I've had people in the past that don't take the time to set up their calculations or to check their calculations, and it really does make a huge difference. That's probably the thing I'd stress the most, is kind of figuring out how to do something early on will save you so much time in the future. And especially with, something like Excel, it's so easy to copy over the different calculations. So for this, for example, I could do the first line, I could make that calculation, and then I could just pull it down and then have it, go the whole way down. And then one trick that I use for fixing that is you put 1 in all of column 1, 2 in all of column 3, 3 in all of column 3 and 3, and then you can kind of see if they don't all equal out, you know that there's a problem somewhere. And then also having it so that there's kind of something that's cross-referenceable on the sheet itself is very helpful. So like with stagehands, having all of the pay of like, say, all the carps and all the electricians and all of that for a show that then comes down to a total, and then having a column for each day that then comes down to a big total as well, you know, and then you can quickly reference to see if those things are, you know, are the same number, so that you can check yourself, which is also great for, you know, like I said before with templates, it's like you can check it once and make sure it's great, and then have the confidence with the paperwork that, you know, you're not going through and there's a mistake that's going to cause, you know, a huge problem. Use reference cells. You should never have to type anything in more than once. If there is paperwork where, you know, for example, if you have, you know, 4 carps this day and that kind of thing, you should have that auto-populating to the next paperwork in a couple ways. Either for the different, you know, kinds of workers, or also if, you know, if you have different rates for different, you know, we had different rates for different venues and different kinds of shows and all those different things. You should be able to make your paperwork change quickly to equate to that, or have different templates for different kinds, which can be even less confusing, to be honest. For that, I put those references on a different sheet, and then I can lock it, so that I know that if you get one rate change, that can really kind of screw you over the rest of it. And so for that, just having it reference it, and then you can plug that into the rest of your sheet and make it so that you only have to write in, you know, yes, you have to write the reference in for the rest of it, but then when you update the paperwork, when, you know, rates change, you're only changing one rate for each thing instead of having to go through all of your paperwork. It's kind of, the less you have to put in those ways, the less mistakes there's going to be, the less, the easier it's going to be to check. And you can lock that too, which is very important. So referencing back from your old paperwork, yeah, it makes it so you have to type as little as possible, because if you're typing, you know, if you have to type carps on 6 different pages instead of having it reference each section, you know, what it's referring back to. 1, you know it's referencing correctly. 2, you know that, you know, if you have a mistake on 6 pages, you know, you're gonna catch that really quickly. Where if you have it on, you know, 1 page, you know, in 1 place, you know, that's a lot less likely to be caught. And then it's another way to like double check yourself as well. So if something's wrong in 1 place, you know it's wrong in 2 places, if that makes sense. Not wrong, but like let's say they want to update the number of electricians on a thing. You should be able to update that once and not have to go through the work, you know, because every time you do something, you should have it checked and that kind of thing. So you're only doing it once. I've seen this happen in shows in the past, looking shows I wasn't in charge of, but where, you know, someone's brought a sheet to the dig that's an old sheet and there's no reference on it. So, you know, they start a setup wrong, or, you know, there's something else, like they've not pulled the right equipment because, you know, it's old paperwork, where if you have the latest version on it, you know, there should be no confusion about that. And you can do versions with, you know, A, B, C, or you can have, you know, I always put the date that it was last modified on each one, especially if there's a lot, and even sometimes the time, if there's a lot of changes happening, you know, if it's, you know, I've had shows where it's like literally changing every 10 minutes, and you've got to like keep up with that. And the easiest way to keep up with that and track that is, one, saving different versions, so that each change is a different version. So that if someone's like, 2 days ago when we were going to have that certain equipment and, we cut all that other tree because that other stuff, can we go back to that version? You can be like, yes, and you're there. But it's got to be referenceable very quickly. And you can also program Excel, and I'm sure most other programs will have something similar as well, where it actually does the date for you, so you don't have to think about it. I'll put the do that on there. When I'm saving paperwork, and then also try to be towards the header of paperwork as well, I try to put as much information as possible. I know sometimes I can make it long, but if you try to abbreviate each thing, especially if it's like a touring show where you're in different venues and you're in different locations, and there's slightly different setups and that kind of thing, if you just put show, venue, or show, date, venue, and then any major change like cut this truss or something, then sometimes that's, it makes it so much easier, especially when you're passing over shows and that kind of thing. So I found with touring, a lot of people kind of memorized one piece of information, because the turnarounds and, it's kind of, everything's so quick, it's almost harder to keep track of like where you are and like what day it is and all of that. So if you have all that information in there, anyone that you pass that paperwork on to can easily reference it in whichever way they're using, either venue or location. One thing that really does the wow factor is having that's not the best example of the wow factor, but having a header on your paperwork so that when it prints out, you've got the show on there, you have, or venue with like, something like that, that really, it makes it really easy to see what, where you're at and what show you're doing. And, if you're doing 17 shows at once, you should be able to pick up paperwork, in an instant and be like, oh, there's the logo and all of that, which is so helpful. And it really does bring your paperwork to the next level, because sometimes people never meet you or, have any real interaction with you or have a brief interaction with you, and all they have is your paperwork. And, does it look very professional? Is it really easy to read? Is it, can they get the information they want from it very quickly? It's also useful to add things like watermarks. So, like the confidential watermark and that kind of thing. So if you have different kinds of shows going on with, stagehands that are there all the time and stuff, and, probably, some things aren't confidential, some things are like, talk about as much as possible so that we can, get more people in the doors. And then other things are going to be like, if you have a shoot, like a film shoot or something like that, that might be super confidential. It's just an easy way to make sure everyone is on the same page with that. Just quick watermark, confidential, and it makes it harder to copy as well. If someone's trying to, use it for something else, if you have, property of or this show, kind of makes it really obvious who kind of owns it. And the show header, a lot of times, you don't even have to worry about making. A lot of marketing will make that already for their paperwork. So then I normally just ask the marketing person. And if not, just a quick show logo on the top can be very effective. Think about printing or how you're distributing your paperwork from the start. So that is something that will just make you go in loops if you don't think about it from the start. So you might have to add something, and that might, there's ways to work around that, but it should be minimal, or you should have to adjust it as minimum times as possible to get it to look nice when someone sees it. Because if they're only going to see a paper copy, it doesn't matter if it looks great on your computer. It matters kind of what they're getting, or if it's going to be used on a website or if someone has to look at it on their phone. You really have to keep these things in mind when you're making it to be what's going to be most effective for the format that you're using. Because nothing will drive you crazier than getting all done with paperwork. It's beautiful, and then you go to print it, and you're like, oh, I gotta shift these, and how do I, if you think about that from the start, you can make adjustments. Like, maybe you gotta split. Like this one has different venues on it. So rehearsals and stuff are all on the same sheet. Which we could pretty easily fit on there. So it's great, but maybe if you have so many rehearsal rooms, maybe it's worth putting that on another sheet. But you want to know that at the beginning, and then make sure all the columns and rows, can be adjusted. Adjust them so that they fit the full screen of whatever you're using. If it is, don't have it kind of in a little bit. Even if there's like a little bit more, if they're a little wider than they need to be, it looks so much better when it's clean and it fits the page. And I know some people can be weird about that. I had that in college where I had a professor that was like, "Can you just make it a little cleaner, a little nicer?" And it's like, if he's noticing and that's bothering him, I'm sure he's not the only one. And make sure when you print it, if you do need to print your paperwork, make sure it's legible when it's printed. Or I've received paperwork where it's like, once it's printed, because they've used such big, you can't read any of it. And you have to I had one where I had to print it on big paper and try to figure out how to without reformatting all of their paperwork just to see everything. And it's like, kind of, printing it once, kind of shows you that, or even the print preview, you can look at it and be like, oh, there's no way I could read this when it's printed. Know who your audience is when you're kind of doing the formatting. Do they like, is every other paperwork that you're seeing coming out from everyone else, is it really flashy, or is it very undertoned? If everyone else is undertoned, some shows it's fine if you kind of have your own thing, but, or if there's a venue, especially I've had venues where they're used to seeing a certain way, and even if it's more legible, they're like, but it's not the way, and sometimes it's easier to bridge the gap of where it was and make it better over time, just to keep people a little calmer. And it is true, if someone is used to reading something in a certain way, that a drastic change to that, can make it a lot harder to read. And like I said before, sometimes that's the only thing you're judged on. If someone picks it up and they can't really figure out the information they need, or they figure it out and it's wrong, that does come back to you. That can be their only impression of you and your work. Readability. What my technique is I try to print out a sheet in the exact way it's going to be printed, and show it to people that that are production managers as well. Show it to people that aren't production managers, that maybe manage a different part of the process, like they're working with the artist and that kind of thing, and then someone that's going to be actually reading the paperwork as well. And it sounds like a lot of work, but if it's effective paperwork, it should only take 1 second. And once you have it so that everyone understands it and gets it, then you don't have to worry about it again. So it's kind of worth taking that extra time. It's definitely a lot less time than showing up on job site and people have read it wrong, and you have to, rethink how you're doing it, but you're in the middle of a load in, so you can't really do it right then. So much easier to do that beforehand. And especially if it's someone that doesn't know your your setups and what kind of information you're communicating, it can make it very effective if they look at it and you ask them, questions like, what's loading in on this day? If they can't, figure that out, then you should rethink how you're doing your paperwork. It's probably the best test I have. Yeah, and quiz them on it. Be like, what's the budget for this day? What's this for this day? And if the information keeps coming back correct, then you're probably good. One thing I've seen with some paperwork is that there's not a lot of separation on it, so it makes it really hard to skim it. Because if you have like when I do my budgets, I have a budget for every day, and then if I need that broken down further, or each day, each kind of position and that kind of thing, I'll have that just transfer over to another sheet so that I can just print that sheet, and then you can have that auto-populate. So, and even making it auto-populate can be very quick. So that, whatever information I'm trying to get from it or communicate, especially, in meetings, it's not, it's literally a quick question. On Tuesday, how much is the video costing for this, so that, because when you're in meetings, they're not going to, the only information they want is kind of the bottom line for a specific thing, so that when you need to make cuts, everyone can make, that appropriate decision. So if it comes from your department, you have to be able to defend why, why it's costing this much, why you need this, to achieve that and all of that. And if you have all of that spelled out, it can be very easy just to be like, this is why. Where if it's not organized, or if it's not easy to, even if it is organized and you don't put those spaces in, for different kinds of technicians, for different kinds of setups, for different kinds of days, it makes it so much harder to get to it quickly. And anyone should be able to skim it and see it, even if they have no idea what your job is and what this paperwork is trying to communicate. They should still be able to find that information. Color on paperwork. I know some programs this isn't as big an option as others. Excel is a great one that you can make it whatever color you want. I personally love color. I know it's not always possible because there's, like on television, you're going to have your pink sheet and your yellow sheet and all of that for each, which is such an amazing system. So that if you can literally look around and be like, Dave's definitely on the wrong page because everyone else is on blue and he's on pink, So that's really not a possibility there. But in normal paperwork, like, especially when it comes to something like different setups for like load-in, or for, I did a show where there was it was like changeover after changeover. They all had very specific technical needs, but each crew kind of had to know which part of each thing they were. So what I had, lighting was yellow and audio was orange, and that, so that when they're going through, when it's like only a couple minutes each one, they can be like, okay, good, I'm not in the next one. Oh, I have to grab that mic for this one. Very specific. Even the flies had their own color. They can just look through and be standing by for each thing. So I find that is just the easiest way it's so much more skimmable than anything else. It's so much easier to do that than to look for audio, and then if you're in the orange, it's highlighted exactly what you need. And then for other things like a load-in where you have a whole bunch of companies like coming together to do a show, it's so effective to have, or even if you have different bands going on, with different setups for lighting and that kind of thing. If you have if you have like a different color for each one, when you're loading in, it's so much easier if you have to go back for like billing and be like, these people went over and it cost us this much money, or they added this much stuff, who was that loaded in at that time. It's very referenceable very quickly if you're using color. Some people definitely do not like it. That's some people just be like, why? My trick for that is I just do a PDF version that's black and white, and then I just send that without having to, adjust anything. And then I think the reason I love color so much is because I'm very dyslexic. So if everything's just black and white, then it's really hard for me to read. Sometimes if there's a lot of separation, it's okay, but I kind of need that color to kind of pick everything out and process everything. The only caveat with that is make sure you're very specific on your color selection. Like, you can't put red and green next to each other because people that are colorblind, that'll just be very confusing. And then also, too bright colors, I can't read those either. They're just, when they're in your face and, it's kind of all you can see and it's hard to read on them. I actually use the Office template colors and themes, and that way I know they all kind of work together, and then I can use the toned down version and it just takes all the work out of it. And then it's a little more calming to look at than the bright in your face colors. Tone of paperwork. Remember who your audience is. A lot of times we can use language without really appreciating how other people are perceiving that, and especially if it's something that there's a lot of different terms for different kind of stagehands. There's a lot of different ways that you could express even really basic things, even different, if you're a different part of the state, different equipment's going to be called different things. Make sure you're kind of keeping track of that so you're not on job site, fielding questions and about, when you're, if you're touring lighting and, they call something very specific, and, you're still going to probably get that, in different venues and that kind of thing, but if you've been there before, maybe make a template for that venue where everything's kind of changed, you got to think about what the skill set is of the people looking at your paperwork. So like with the changeover paperwork that I made, that was going to be used by the director, because I think I was the only person really keeping track of all the different, because they were constantly, the drummers are going to have these mics. Oh, now, they're going to be on a skateboard, and now it's, changed to this kind of setup. So I was the only one that kind of had all of that information to keep track of. So putting that all in a template, I have to think of, making sure the audio knows what kind of mics, but then also making sure that that's not confusing to the director or the designer, or the lighting person. So kind of either using both terminology, like the Conga mic, and then in parentheses what it is, so that the person can skim, so that both people are getting the information they're needing, but it's not like a paragraph, and, where if you just put the mic, that'll be great for the audio person, but the director's going to be like, I don't know what this is. But they might. And then other things are like, some things can be offensive that you would never think about. Like I had one show I did, a long time ago, where they put up signs that said musicians this way and singers this way, and the singers are like, so I'm not a musician? Like, what? It's very confused. Do I go down both hallways? It can be very offensive. So just being very selective on that kind of terminology and saying instrumentalists and singers instead. And different, like the union might be called carps, or electricians, where in a different venue they want to be lighting technicians and that kind of thing, and just kind of keeping track of that and making sure that everyone's on the same page. Add a key. It's important to add a key, not only just to for abbreviations. So if there is like a band that's like really has a really long name, or lighting equipment that you're using that has, you know, a whole bunch of different, you know, if you're using like 3 different kinds of Martin fixtures, for example, if you have that spelled out at the bottom so that someone, or at the top, depending on how it's being used, then you can quickly do that, and then you can get to your paperwork quicker without having to use all the space for all the, you know, different lighting fixtures and that kind of thing. If you've broken it down from color, make sure that that's spelled out as well, so that, you know, if an audio person is trying to skim quickly, you know, if they've not touched that show for 2 weeks, they don't want to kind of, you know, have to read and be like, oh, that's a mic, that's a, you know, be like orange. Okay, I'm in the next one, I'm not in the next one, and that kind of thing. It's kind of subconscious, you know, you got to look, and you have to, when you're putting those in, you have to think about how people are going to read it, how, you know, if it's a color, you probably want it at the top so that it flows. And then, you know, if it is an abbreviation, maybe at the bottom, especially if, you know, if the lighting person's going to completely understand what it is, then, you know, it might be referenceable for someone else, so that when they're reading it, you know, if a stage manager is like, I see these things on the platform, what is that? Oh, it's a lighting fixture. Okay. And then anything that you get, if you get more than one question from a group of people, then it probably needs to be clarified on the paperwork, or it needs to be, you know, reformatted, because that's kind of, you know, at that point that you're not being effective. Because I think they did a study on this, and it's like, for every one person that comes to you, there's 9 other people that haven't come to you. So you could have a whole stage of people that are very confused, but only 2 people are willing to kind of speak up and be, you know. And what's great about the constant update is that you only have to fix it once if you're doing templates and that kind of thing. You only have to, like, you know, make sure it's clear once. Saving formats. This is really important if you're working in a team. So if a lot of different people are going to be using the paperwork, and you know, and a lot of software actually does put the date on there automatically. If not, I make sure I have that in the line, so that when someone else is referencing the different changes, they can very easily go back and be like, this is, you know, this was that one change that we had. And then also version of, you know, the details of the versions, especially if you're going to have to share that with like a producer or something that's going to make the decision of cutting the video wall, or cutting the orchestra, or cutting some big element. You know, if you spell it out, you know, this show, this date, no orchestra, then there's no questions about it. It just cuts out a lot of, you know, when you're sharing stuff, it just cuts out a lot of questions, a lot of having to go back and forth. And also, if there is one that's not, if you have 4 different versions, make sure you spell out all of them. If you have one that just doesn't have a detail on it, then it's just going to make it even more confusing. So even just putting with everything or something like that, just to make sure. Otherwise, you know, you have to open it and be like, why is this one different if it's not, you know? Just kind of thinking ahead of all the questions that someone might give you will save you a lot of time. Do the training. So even if you don't have, if you've like just been given a new software and you're like, all right, Jenny, we're using this on the next show, you know, you've just gone into Lightride or something like that, make sure that you at least skim what the software can do, so that you know, maybe you can't do it on this show, but you know that you want to add that for the next show. Or maybe if you've got a problem with the paperwork and you're trying to figure out a quick way to do that, if you know that it can do something, it makes a huge difference. You know, you might, I mean, we've all run into that where you're like, you do know there's a button for that, right? So just knowing even broad strokes of what the paperwork or what the software can do can just save you so much time. And knowing what it can't do as well, so you don't spend time like running around the internet trying to figure out what how to get something done if it can't even do it. Yeah, and always spend the time to look it up, spend the time to do it. I know sometimes it feels like we don't have the time, but if you look it up and you actually get that done, you've probably spent as much time, and even if it is more time than finding a quick fix, it's going to save you time in the future. So overall, it will save you a lot of time. So working on a team. So I personally really, really love working with software that can automatically update and send information out to everyone. There's so many different options for this. Microsoft Project Professional is one. I personally got stuck on Asana because of one of the companies I worked for. And I just, even starting with a new show, I can start with one of my old templates and then kind of fix it around. This is especially good if you're working on a venue or you're touring and there's a lot of different things that you have to fix. It makes it so that you can upload all your information in one place. And a lot of them you can lock them so that you don't have your budget out everywhere and that kind of thing. It also alerts people when there's a change. So if you have, if you're on tour and the show in like 2 weeks and you just realize that you can't have the stairwell, so it's going to be cut, you can put that in the software and it will actually update people. So, so that if they have that bug in their ear, and then when they open this up for that day, they can be like, all right, let's make sure we don't pull that out of the truck, You can actually save all of your paperwork onto it. So you can put, if you have your budget there, you can put your budget on it. If you have your, I need to book this person, and I need to make sure that the fire department's here, and I need to make sure that, I put this in the budget because it costs this each time. You need to make sure that, or you can have that on there as well, and you can have their contact information. You can have any regulations that are involved in that. For me, it saved me so much time on some of my shows just from not having to look up that information and be like, what was that person's name? It's just there, especially if you only use them once a year. There's a vendor that, you get your dry ice from. You're not reinventing the wheel every time. Yeah, you might have that information somewhere, but it's so much easier if you open up your show, because not only do you have the information there, but it reminds that you actually do have to get dry ice. So with this paperwork, you can actually assign people tasks. So instead of having to send an endless thing of emails, about, arranging the piano tuner or someone to move the piano or making sure the equipment's there, you can actually put them on this, assign it to them, and then they have that information. And it's referenced not just an email somewhere. Sometimes it's nice to send an email as well. But, making sure that it's there, and then it'll also remind them right before. It also updates the whole team, so you don't have to, do the group email and be like, hey everyone, this is happening, this small change happened. With big changes, obviously, you're going to want to take that time and maybe do phone calls and all that stuff. But with small changes, it's so much easier just to have it, because no one's going to remember it changed in 2 weeks, if it's an evolving show. And if you have to pass it over, you have all the information in one place, which is so much easier. Just passing over a show when everything's in emails is just an absolute nightmare. So just having this and being like, okay, I copied on that project. Now you can run with all the information that you need. It's also an active checklist, like I was talking about with the dry ice, where you're like, it actually checks it, and you can see, you can go through with the other view. You can go see what's been done, what's not been done. So if you're juggling 17 shows, you can very easily go through and be like, okay, I've got to get this. And you can put, if there are deadlines, there's a certain amount of time that you have to get a street closure. beforehand, or there's a certain amount of time that you have to book the fire department. All that information is in there, so you can make sure you get that done in a timely manner. Yeah, and just having all of, especially like call sheets and all of that in one place, updating is just so helpful, because even people can look at previous versions and see where, where the changes were, if they need to, if they're updating themselves on a project, like let's say they're, the head of video, and they want to know how things have changed over time, so that they don't ask, can we get this other equipment? They've already seen that it got cut and that kind of thing. Yeah. So that was my presentation. Thank you so much for showing up. If you'd like to contact me, all of my information is right there, LinkedIn, email, and my website as well. And that's my beautiful cat Muffin. Thanks so much.
All right, we do have some questions if you'd like to take them.
Yeah.
The first one is asking, with the colors, does that become a problem when people are colorblind?
I've had colorblind people that I've actually showed them the paperwork to make sure that something wasn't confusing, but that can be an issue, which is, you can either make sure that you only have red or green on the sheet, or, whichever, and I think catering paperwork like that is very important to make sure that everyone has the same experience, or you can make it black and white so that they just don't have to worry about it.
All right, the next question is asking, how do you have a file saved? Do you not save over the file and get rid of the old files until the show is over?
Yeah, I never save over a file. You never know when, because it's going to be some meeting somewhere where someone's like, hey, 2 versions ago when we had the video wall and then we cut it, there's the amount of time I've had to go back to paperwork it's pretty consistent. Especially if you're doing something like lighting or production management, because, there's constant changes. There can be constant changes, but then a lot of times, someone will go back and want to go back to a previous version where there was an orchestra or there was a video wall. And you have to be able to, people want that information right now. So to go back and reference it is just incredibly helpful.
All right, the next question is asking, what program will assign people jobs?
Oh, there's actually, there's loads of programs like that. I'm trying to think of, my favorite one is, there's some really good ones out there now. There's some that you can actually put it in and it'll have people's skill sets, and then you can actually use that to assign them jobs. I'm blanking. I had it written down too. Darn it.
Brad, do you know of the program that she's searching for?
I know like Microsoft Project, like she spoke about, a few others you can assign tasks to people, for sure.
Yeah, there are some just for crewing. I'm trying to think of the names of them. Oh, some really, really good ones just came out too.
Well, that's okay. We can move on to the next question.
Yeah.
Maybe someone will remember. The next one's asking, how were you able to practice organization? Do you have a portable hard drive specifically for your show files?
I do it in a couple ways. One is I always try to have some version that's on the cloud. Because you never know when, like with lighting and stuff, like if you're a touring person that you're like out for dinner or something and you get an emergency call where someone's like, I need this stuff now, and then you can just forward them, it takes 2 seconds on your phone if you've got it on the cloud. Always on the cloud. I try to do an external hard drive as well, because if your computer crashes, you don't, and you're in the middle of a show, it does happen. You need to make sure that you can get all that information quickly. And then if you don't have internet on job site as well, these things happen. So having it in 3 places, referenceable, and that's one of the reasons that something like Asana and stuff is really useful, because that is a way, it's all online. So you can easily reference all of your paperwork on it. And then also having it as a hard drive, and on your computer is kind of how I do my saving. At least 3 versions or at least 3 places at a time.
Okay, the next question is asking, how much of an issue have you encountered with colored paper being illegible under various lighting scenes?
I have not really encountered that as much, but I think that's because I use the very toned down colors, where with the bright colors, as soon as you, I know what you mean. It really makes some pop, and then it's hard to kind of get through it. If you use everything that's kind of the same tone, that's lower, I've not had big issues with it, to be honest, especially because when you're going through it, you know, a lot of, if people are looking at their paperwork, they tend to be, you know, they have their flashlights and that kind of thing, or, you know, during a scene change, if the curtains are closed, or they've checked it right beforehand under the blue light, so it's not as, you know, as big an issue.
All right, next question is asking, do you prefer to work in a local program and share the files, or do you make use of cloud-based systems such as Google Docs?
I do a lot of cloud, especially if I'm sharing, like Asana and that kind of stuff is all cloud-based, so it's, or internet-based, so that it makes it so much easier to transfer all that. And then you know that when you are putting something on it, it's the official version, because you might have 10 versions before you share it with everyone else. You know, before the powers that be make their decision if you're going to get a bigger budget or that kind of thing, or, you know, if some, you know, like we had flights, you know, there was some plane thing that was completely out of our control, so the flights suddenly were like twice the cost, so then we had to cut budget somewhere else, you know, which is totally out of your control. So I want to make sure that that's all fixed before I send it out to the lighting person and then suddenly be like, oh, just kidding, that's going to be a lot less. I want to make sure that's all official, and that's kind of one of the best things about the Asana and that kind of thing as well, is that I can really filter what I'm sending out.
Okay, next question is asking, where did you graduate college or school? Was your education geared towards this profession?
Yes, I graduated from Guildhall School of Music and Drama, was my undergrad. And I did a broad-based degree, so I learned, you know, production management, and then I majored mostly in lighting design, stage management as well. And then so for that, yeah, there was a lot of, I still remember like the first time I had to make my first paperwork, and like being from my production management teacher and just being like, I don't know where to start. Yeah, so it was all geared towards that. And then when I moved to production management, because I felt like I had some information to still learn with like budgeting and that kind of thing, I got an MBA, which wasn't geared specifically to the industry, but it was still very helpful because it's like working with people and getting, you know, doing budgets and that kind of thing.
I have a question for you based off of that one. I'm curious, how did you know going into college that lighting design was something that was even an option? Was that something you were exposed to in high school through theatrical productions?
Mine's interesting because I started out as a stage manager in high school. I think it was middle school. I went and my best friend wanted to be an actress or an actor, so, you know, and it was the only class we could have together, so I literally just signed up for that. And then I saw people working backstage, and I was like, that's where it's at. That's so much better. And then I did it all through high school, stage management. I did lighting a little bit, but not very much. And then when I got to college, it was a broad base, so you do a little bit of everything. It was literally like the whole year you learn, you know, which has been so useful, like painting and production management and sound and lighting and all of that. And my first day of lighting class, we walked around outside, and my teacher just pointed out, you know, the shadows of everything, and it was like a whole new world that's always been around me that I've never seen. And after that, I was like, lighting. This is for sure lighting.
Interesting, thank you. Okay, so we have a few more questions. Do you charge your clients for your time to prepare paperwork, or is it just part of your overall deal?
It depends, because like if I'm like, I was a venue production manager, so for that kind of like, because I still got my my weekly wages. So, and I was doing paperwork, so yes. And then for lighting, yes, for sure. You want to, if possible, I mean, certain, when you're first starting out, you have a little bit less leverage, but you should be getting paid for a day or two of prep for your paperwork and that kind of thing. Even our stagehands, when they did paperwork and prepped lights and stuff, we'd make sure that they got paid for that.
All right, next question is asking, in reality, how often do you actually distribute printouts versus sending electronic files?
It depends, because when I was a production manager, I would mostly actually just do electronics, because just in the sake of saving paper, if someone doesn't want, if they want to do everything on their phone, or if they have an iPad that they're following, with everything, that's one less thing that didn't need to be printed. So if they want to print it, they can print it themselves. But I would still always have a physical copy of every paperwork that I made at my desk, because every single show, someone's like, oh, I can't get my schedule, and I'm just like, there you go, it's right there. And then when I did the lot of changeovers, I made a lot of copies of that, because, stagehands, they're just there, for the show, and that's the first time they're looking, or, maybe the rehearsal and then the show, and they're only, running it like once or twice before the show. They're going to need that physical copy of just going, and they may not have as much access as the stagehands that are there all the time. So yeah, so just, it depends on each thing. Like in touring, I'm not handing out paperwork, most likely. I've already sent it to them, and the pictures are already addressed the way I want them to be.
Okay, next question is asking, you talked about Excel. What other software is essential for your paperwork needs?
It depends, because I kind of use whatever I have access to. So definitely Asana. One of the places I worked, they did Trello, but I try to, I definitely do Microsoft Word for certain kinds of paperwork, if something just needs to be really spelled out. And then also asset management as well. I'm trying to think of the kinds I've used in the past, because that can just be so essential for putting in, like some asset management, you can actually book people and do the skill sets and all that stuff as well that I was talking about. And then you have some that are just, meant just for booking crew. I wish I wasn't blanking on the names of these. But yeah, asset management's huge, especially if you're working in a venue where you have to book out the year so that you know that no one else is going to use it. That's going to be essential as well.
Okay, and then we have a final question. Does a task-based system such as a Microsoft project require everyone to have a software license, or only you?
It depends. It's very different on all of the software, because I went through a whole thing, because I started an asset management, or I installed an asset management company for one of the businesses I worked for, and I went through all the different kinds, and really it is full spectrum. So I personally use Asana, because, and I think Trello is the same, where you don't need a license. There are certain options that if you're going to go to the next level, like making sure that only certain people can see certain things, you do need the license, but Asana is free. I believe Trello is free. You do have to buy the Microsoft Professional, and then the asset management, you'd also need a license. But sometimes, some of them you have to buy one license, and then if you access it from the internet, that's all you need is the one license. But then they're also different. Like one, you can have it so that one person only, you have one license that can actually adjust the system, and then everyone else can just access it for free. But some, it's like every person accesses, you have to pay. So it really is full spectrum.
Okay, wonderful. It looks like that was the last question. So up on the screen right now, you can see Jenny's contact information. It sounds like she's open to taking questions. So if you think of anything additional, if you want to reach out to her directly, and her website is on there too if you want to see more examples of her work that she does. So
Yes,
Jenny, thank you. Yeah, oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. If you send me the email about the software, I can give you a full list.
Perfect. Thank you so much for presenting. It's always a pleasure working with you. We really appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for attending. If you want to see any information about our upcoming sessions, please visit pro.harman.com and you can see the full upcoming calendar on there. So thank you and have a great day, everyone.